Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever. And with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security with Invicti, the zero-noise application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API. With unparalleled accuracy, coverage, and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. Invicti, AppSec with zero noise. Visit securityweekly.com/Invicti. Struggling to secure all your applications with modern identity services? You're not alone. But with identity orchestration, you can say goodbye to refactoring and complexity. Strata Identity helps you modernize app identity at scale while mitigating security risks and simplifying policy management. Maintain a consistent security posture and simplify policy management with identity orchestration. If you're ready to simplify your identity environment and improve your app security, share your IAM challenge with the Strata team to get a brand new set of earbuds. Just visit securityweekly.com/strata to learn more. That's securityweekly.com/strata. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked about top 10 lists, so many lists, and the things that AppSec cares about, but also why it's important to move beyond the Control-C, Control-V of lists and create resources that benefit developers. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella, and it's just about time for the news. But first, one announcement. Our teams from Security Weekly and SC Media were on site at RSA Conference 2023, delivering in-depth reporting, analysis, and interviews. If you were unable to join us in person or missed our live stream from Broadcast Alley, you can find all of our coverage, including video interviews with leaders from the community at securityweekly.com/RSAC. And John, we're back. It's like it's been so long since we talked after that break. I'm working on a quiz now next on common weaknesses enumeration, so CWEs. So there's a few thousand of them. So start studying. We'll see how that goes. But before we get into more quizzes, I guess I do have a question. It's not directed to you specifically, John, but you're going to have to help me answer this. .zip TLD. I don't really care. Like, why do we care? To me, this doesn't look like a terrible new thing about phishing. Phishers are just going to find URLs. And if we as an InfoSec industry are relying on users to inspect URLs to figure out whether it's good or bad, I think we failed. Should I care more about .zip as a TLD?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's a little... I think to a small degree, unfortunately, users are, as we were talking about last half, it's users they're definitely smarter and they're getting more aware about what's going on in here. But even like really, folks that are doing this stuff day in, day out, I mean, security people are trainers or people who are even actually focused around, giving classes against phishing are getting phished. So that things can become more and more sophisticated. I think that having .zip as a TLD is probably not doing any favors. But that's sort of a Windows-centric thing. The other one in my head is imagine if there was a .exe. And the thought that bumped through my head there a second ago was, okay, on a Mac or on a Linux machine, that's not going to be as much of a thing for me to click on. It's not going to be as much of a distractance, that extension, because we don't care about extensions as much for executables. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it got a lot of noise. I think what's fun to me is that came out of Google. Like, what did the Google security team must have really been drowning their sorrows that day. But yeah, we'll have to see how it goes. I think I suspect it's going to make things worse, but let's come back to it in about 6 months.
Well, yeah, definitely put that in our 6 months category. And I think for me is also too that let's talk about some threat scenarios that are beyond just you clicked a link. It's sort of like, who cares if you clicked a link? What were the consequences of that click? And that's where we could talk about 0 days or MFA or different types of things, but not everyone is being attacked by 0 days. We have auto updates, things like that. So that's the thing that the other aspect of this I wanted to highlight is that clicking on a link isn't the threat scenario. What are the consequences? And let's focus our top 10 thinking on ways of making clicking on a link just like any other link. It's just what you're allowed to do. It's what you're supposed to do.
Top 10 link clicking.
linky clicky. Either that or implement RFC 3514. One of my favorite April Fool's
carrier
jokes.
pigeons?
No, this is the evil bit.
Oh, yes.
Carrier pigeon was 1134, if I remember correctly, but maybe in 1129.
Now we know what next week's quiz is going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Listeners, help us out. Help send John some questions to ask me. Other question. I don't have a question here. More of a comment. Just a triple threat about Teltonica routers from Clarity. From the Team 82, I've highlighted a couple of their articles of this year, I think, and I like the write-ups. To me, this was pretty neat, if simple, in the sense of what the attack scenarios are. And it goes into some reverse engineering. It talks about, if you're into embedded devices, like picking apart things, read that aspect in detail. Otherwise, it looks like some classic, here is some knowledge. Either you have essentially valid credentials, the MAC address and the password for a device that you've gotten off of from physical access or a picture of it, or you can impersonate that, do some spoofing if you just have this data. So it looked like some very basic types of web application problems that are just manifesting in a different area. So I just want to cover it in that way real quickly. But for those of you who are into the reverse engineering, go ahead and dive in and read some more about the firmware analysis they did.
Yeah. Really briefly, just this category of product to me is usually to most folks out there, definitely most security people, if you say, what do you think of if I say cloud-based networking device, or cloud-managed networking device? Most people are like, oh my God, that sounds like a horrible idea. And this is one example of that. It's unfortunately, the level of effort which we need to put into making these things really secure and the management of them secure tends to not happen. So we end up with stories like this one.
We indeed do. We also end up with stories about fuzzers. And this one about is Google security created a new eBPF fuzzer, which we had just talked about with Liz Rice back in episode 235 about eBPF. And everyone go check out her book if you want to learn more about it. To me, I didn't necessarily want to get into the details of fuzzing the validator, other than to point out that it was creating like 35,000 programs per minute to go test it, which is pretty awesome. And they did point out one CVE so far that the fuzzer has found. And I think that is sort of the measure of what we want to look at in terms of the trade-off of cool new tools, the engineering resources to implement, maintain a fuzzer, and is it finding bugs? It's a little bit hard to think of, but there's a JS Fun Fuzz that's famous in Firefox, Mozilla land, and it has a few thousand vulnerabilities that is found against it. And John, you also found another article about fuzzing, so clearly there's something good going on here.
Yeah, lots of fuzzy love. I think it's quite, I'll say astonishing that if they're generating 35K eBPF programs, basically apps per minute, and they're still only finding that few fault, that's significantly less than I would have expected. So hey, kudos on that.
It is impressive, yes.
But yes, Amazon AWS in particular announced Snap Change, which is another fuzzer. And what they're doing, which is a little different, is it uses KVM, the hypervisor, the alternative to Zen, which many people would think of. And what that gives you is part of the problem with any of these fuzzing systems is getting the application to that state where then you are testing the thing you want to fuzz. Because usually what you're looking for is to crash the application. Mm-hmm. But also, if you're looking for the application to show something which is a sign there's a vulnerability. It could be a crash, it could be some sort of execution if you're really lucky, depending on how you're fuzzing. But there's a lot of work to get, the program up and running, configuration read, things set up in the particular way you want for this particular fuzz test, and all that work. And that's, if you have to do it every single time, the actual fuzz test itself is probably, I'd say, like 5% of the program execution. The rest is setting everything up for that. So what some of the folks at Amazon have figured out is, well, let's run the application in a virtual machine. Let's take a snapshot of it. When we have it at the state where we want to actually do the fuzz test, take a snapshot and then have snap change, give that snapshot to snap change, and then have it refire up the VM from that snapshot and then go ahead and run the test. So it allows you to, it's automating a part of that workflow. So that seems pretty neat. And yeah, again, it's you have to be, this is not, to be clear, something you could just go run on AWS. While I believe there's still KVM underneath, they're not going to let you take a snapshot and run it like that. That's an exercise for our listeners. There is the ability to take snapshots of your VMs in EC2, and then you could turn those into AMIs. But yeah, I wouldn't have a memory. So I don't know. Someone can play with that and come back to us. I think that'd be an interesting thing to look at as well, to use the cloud for that. But yeah, another example of fuzzing love.
Fuzzing love, and as you pointed out, it's getting that app into a state so that it finds that little bug and that can be fixed. Because one of the things I love about fuzzing is that if it crashes, that's a bug to fix. Now, there may be a distinction of is it vulnerable or exploitable or not, but fixing bugs is a good thing. Not fixing bugs is a worrying thing. What about this smart plug that's not going to get fixed?
Yeah, so I think my comment in the show notes were we have this growing collection of IoT type things that are not getting, they're being called end of life even though they have vulnerabilities in them. So instead of having technical debt, do we now have vulnerability debt? And I think that's what we're going to start seeing. In and of itself, it's the vulnerability is quite basic. So there is a name field which can take up to 30 characters for the device. Some folks figured out if you send a rename API call and give it more than 30 characters, you're going to do a buffer overflow. And as we've learned over the years, once you have a buffer overflow, now it's like, how do you get it to execute something in memory? And they figured that out as well. So they're able to, it's a smart plug, right? So it's going to be on a network. Hopefully it's not going to be published to the internet, but there's somewhere someone could remotely turn your thing on and off, whatever your thing is. But the interesting part, why it got sort of mentioned here, is so Wemo is now owned by Belkin. And Belkin has said, we end life to that version of that plug. So best of luck. And I think this is going to be, we've already talked about this before and I didn't want to spend too long on it, but like as these things go on over the next few years, I think there's some projects out there now which are trying to open source some of these things and keep them patched and up to date. This is probably, I'm guessing it's A266, so you can probably flash Tasmoda or something else onto it. But like that's something that I can do. I've got pictures out on Instagram of me like actually soldering the wires to get the serial on there to update it. But that's not the average user. So how do we keep these things secure over time? I mean, when they're that cheap to pick up and you have them in a drawer until you use them, by the time you get around to using them, they could be no longer supported, and that's not great.
That's not great. I'm adding best of luck to our AppSec in 3 words. Not going to commit you as that as your official answer, but best of luck sounds pretty good. There's also there's 2 behemoths doing a bunch of stuff in articles this week. Intel is removing some code, removing some legacy support, which I'm always a fan of. The principle of deleting code is a security benefit. Now, obviously, I don't mean like deleting the authorization mechanisms or deleting things that are that break down security boundaries, but getting rid of legacy code that's not executing. So tell us more about this.
Yes, so this is it started as a blog post from I believe he's one of the engineers over at Intel on the chip side. So think through the history of everyone of Intel x86. Well, it's now called x86. So back to 8086, 286, 386, 46, Pentium, blah blah. Here we go. Those were originally the 8082 was the first one. No, 8084 was 8-bit instruction set, or maybe 4-bit, then 8-bit instruction set, then a 16-bit. And basically, you don't really need too many bits on the instruction side, but you definitely need it on the memory side as we have more and more memory. Long story short, we've been carrying they got rid of 16-bit support, I want to say about a decade ago. It could be longer. Now they're actually thinking about getting rid of 32-bit support. So for average Joe, we don't care, but even just to boot an operating system onto your system, you start in a 32-bit mode, and then you have to do what's called a trampoline to get up into a 64-bit execution mode. And that's where most of your stuff happens nowadays. But you're still able to have backward support for 32. So that's the overall picture here. But the thing is, since they're thinking about getting rid of that 32-bit support, as Mike was saying, hopefully that should decrease our footprint of potential vulnerabilities. But at the same time, as folks now have to go through and either maybe just a simple recompile their app. Well, it's a simple recompile to you or me, right? But that means the code is changing underneath the assembly code. So possibility of adding new bugs in there. 64-bit code hadn't been tested. I'm grasping for straws here. I get that. Send the hate comments to Mike at securityweekly.com. Yeah, so we're making a change. And anytime we make a change, there's a possibility we're going to introduce more vulnerabilities. So again, as I was talking about before in the last half, is beside us nerding out on this, how would you talk about that to your development team or other folks and think about, okay, well, what does this mean to us? Is this a security thing? Even just the fact that you're having to spend time on that 64-bit thing versus, more logging, that's taking away time that could have been used for security. So just think about how you think about it, or if it makes any difference to you at all, or maybe Mike and John should talk about something else.
Well, there's another way of also approaching these types of, issues is not just deleting code, but refactoring or re-implementing code. And this is what Microsoft has been talking about, and many others, Linux kernel, we've been talking about this before, Android, Mozilla, starting with Mozilla and the browsers. But I linked to some slides, some videos about just Microsoft's thinking on this. And, part of it is talking about moving big rocks. So rather than the idea of eliminating entire bug classes or going after those common reasons we have Patch Tuesday now for almost 20 years. And they mentioned running as admin, unrestricted platform, and memory safety. Now, adopting Rust clearly is targeted towards memory safety. And I think I wanted to mention those other two, running as admin, unrestricted platform, because you could potentially have memory safe code that's still is exploitable, still creating vulnerabilities in those other areas. But we want to focus on, this is the vulnerability class. This is something to tackle, and we have to write some code to do it. So rather than go and lint all their code, go and fix all the C and C++, they're saying, we've learned a bit about how modern software architectures look, how design works. From what that we've learned, let's go and try and fix some of the important stuff. So hopefully I don't think they're going to be implementing calc for all the pop calc proofs of concepts, but they'll hopefully be doing something that is more fundamental within the OS. So
I'll give a slight preview. There's an article which I found this morning. It's actually one of the talks from KubeCon that was given by Greg Castle and some of the Google security team that I'm going to have in here next week. I want to actually watch it first, but some of the brief things I saw on the Twitter this morning was they were talking about basically the talk is around getting rid of root user containers. Containers have to be root user because that's breakout issues. But they go through like a few basic challenges of why people weren't using non-root containers, weren't building non-root containers. And you just hit upon a few of them as like, there's some standard things we can do out there to get rid of root and some of these things. And the result of that is you suddenly narrow that footprint again in a significant way. And it seems like that's our theme today, is narrowing that footprint. But that's it's super important. And it's one of those things that, do you need to focus on all of the OWASP top 10, or do you need to look more at hardening your application environment? And yeah, it's something to think about.
Something to think about. And we usually don't talk about APTs or the threat actors too much, although I did have some fun with Microsoft's new taxonomy of APTs. But you grabbed something, John, that was kind of interesting. Maybe it does I think it ties into some of this memory safety we were just talking about.
Yeah.
Stack rumble. Let's get ready to rumble. I can't do the voice, but man, let's get ready to rumble.
We'll have to get someone to do something on that.
Yes, exactly.
Fix it in post. Yeah. So Trend Micro, I can't, APT 41. It's APT 41. Trend Micro found these guys doing something a little new and different. So this thing called stack rumbling. What's that? And what that is in a nutshell, if I can find it in the doc, I know it's in my show notes, so they've figured out, and this is a Windows thing, and I haven't run Windows on a desktop in a long time. I probably should just get my hands dirty again, but what they are doing with Windows nowadays is you're able to specify a collection of options around how an application starts or how it runs. From think like a memory configuration point of view and things like that. So The fine folks over at APT41 or some of their consultants have figured out that one of the options in there you can set is the minimum amount of stack size for an application to run. So what they have figured out is if you set that minimum stack size to the max stack for the machine or the maximum amount of memory for that machine, when the operating system goes to allocate the environment for it and set up memory and things like that, it goes, oh, I don't have enough memory to be able to allocate that stack size, so it just doesn't run the program. It exits with an out of memory error, or not in memory not available. You get the idea. So why do these guys care about this? They are now going through, they look for, when they're installing their malware, their loader will look for what other antivirus or EDR or different sort of security tools are running on there. And if they see them running, they will update their configuration to set the the minimum stack size to the max of memory, and then they'll terminate the program. And then when it goes to try and restart, it ain't going to restart. So they found a way to DOS the system to not allow the security tools to run. So interesting. The reason I'm bringing it up here just from the academic of it is, again, it's a tool which was never thought of to be used that way. Could you do that with Java? I haven't tried this yet, but when you're firing up a Java VM, you're able to specify your minimax memory size, I believe. I know you can do max. I think you can do min. So could you do something similar with Java applications? And that wouldn't have. Hopefully, you're not writing your security tools, your antivirus in Java, because then we should have a talk. But yeah, sort of interesting, how something which was initially supposed to be designed to help people or help developers set up a program to run correctly can now be used in a nefarious way.
Yeah, and let's make a call back to the OWASP top 10 with insufficient logging and monitoring. Hopefully you do, as an org, have some monitoring with your security tools, if those processes are dying and not restarting. But it gets into the idea of that can be a lot of noise. So which ones are the signals? Which ones are the noise? Speaking of noise, I just grabbed a real quick article. This is more just from PyPy, that over the weekend they had to suspend new user and new project registrations because there were just a massive volume of malicious users, malicious packages. And this one was not so much something that's new. It's more of just pointing out to the volume, and they were relying on people to do a lot of the review, a lot of the reaction here. So there's a impedance mismatch, if you will, between attacker and defender here. And this is where, if we're talking about where could we spend more time, what if we spent more time helping counter these types of scenarios so PyPy could rely on some more automation to help defend against malicious use of their project repo. Not sure I can pull anything more interesting out of that. It was just a quick comment. So I don't know if you have anything there.
Vaguely related to that, and I haven't looked into this too quickly. I didn't add it into our show notes, but you just made me think of it. There was an article out there. I'll go back and add it in. There's another Python packaging system called Rye, because what we all need is another packaging system. And I didn't look at it too closely yet. Apparently, it's sort of they're taking the learnings of Cargo and Rust and trying to apply that to Rye. So a little more bootstrapping involved, or it does a little more bootstrapping than what you see by default with pip. But it could be sort of interesting for folks to look at that as well. I'm guessing it's still going to use PyPy behind the scenes. So I don't know. We'll throw it in. People can look and tell us what it does.
We'll keep an eye there. Yes, and by all means too, I'll generalize that a little bit to let us know if there are certain areas of focus that you'd love to hear us grab more of in these articles or in these topics. Please, we'd love your feedback. I did, for as much as we were talking about top 10 lists, I went and literally got a top 10 vulnerabilities in 2022. So this is from Sneak. It is behind a reg wall. So for those of you that want to throw up some information to fill out a form and submit it. But the reason I wanted to grab this, it talks about directory traversal, CWE22. So that's one of my favorite vulnerabilities. So I thought that was pretty awesome to see. It's still alive and kicking, for being an ancient vulnerability.
How is
hold that thought.
Top 10, but go ahead.
Hold that thought, John, because there were actually two. I went and read through the top 10, and there were two that kind of made me shrug or go, really? So number 8 was sensitive cookie with HTTP only flag. This sounds like Bug Bounty Cruft. I'm not sure that one. That one doesn't really excite me. And then there was another one, Clear Text Transmission of Sensitive Information. And I was like, I get the importance of that, but browsers are, opportunistically HTTPS or HTTPS only. I was a bit confused how that one makes a list too. So
those two things sound like things I talked about with customers 15 years ago. So was this a top 10 list of things that they're finding in software, or a top 10 list of actual issues in the community?
These were code vulnerabilities in 2022. So, and we can probably use that on another topic sometime to talk about CVSs scores and CWEs and CVEs, and just which ones should we bother with fixing? Spoiler, almost none of them. And which ones should we care about?
Could we do a top 10 CVSs score?
All right, we're going to work on that. While I'm thinking of that, there was, speaking of designs, there's a new RFC coming out from Apple and Google that's picking up from work they've already done. So, Apple and others, small players in this area have, location trackers, that you can, the physical device you can throw on somewhere and track your lost luggage, track your something, whatever you wanted to track the location of. But obviously this comes with abuse scenarios of tracking people. And so Apple did develop a way to say, hey, there is a unattended tracker near you. But of course, if that only works within the Apple ecosystem, that's not great for everybody that's outside that ecosystem. Same thing would be for Google. So Apple and Google are getting together, working on a standard about interoperability here. And for me, it was, one, I just wanted to highlight that aspect of the privacy, safety issues that come of this. But RFCs, bear with me, RFCs can be fun to read from a security perspective because it's a great way to look at protocols. Think about what are some threat scenarios, some ways you might attack the protocol, and then compare what the RFC describes to how a protocol might be implemented. And it's those gaps between design and implementation that we often see vulnerabilities come from. So if you're out there trying to think about new presentations or topics to think about for Hacker Summer Camp or another B-Sides, poke around at this RFC or some other new ones that are coming out. So that's the angle I wanted to take on that one.
I did give a scan of the RFC. It looks it looks like it still needs a bit more work. And again, the RFC is for the trackers overall, not just for privacy, the privacy aspect, the anti-tracking aspect of it. That's covered in there. And yeah, I don't know about you, Mike. I think this is the first time I've looked at an RFC, or first time I've heard of a new RFC, and it's been a while for me. So sort of nice to see, should not be in all caps again. It's been a while.
Indeed. Yes. And I do enjoy reading the HTTP2, HTTP3 quick, though those have come out as, I think both those as RFCs as well. So it is fun to read, but man, there in web land, there's definitely feels like a dearth of new protocols, that are coming. There also one real quick highlight. I have 2 links to conferences. There's some playlists of videos available from Real World Crypto and BSidesSF. The Real World Crypto is a write-up from NCC Group. Can have some pointers of some things you might be interested in. I mentioned those in passing. Another article in passing is a survey from the OpenSSF. They're looking for software security awareness. What do people think of when they think of OpenSSF? Do they? What do they think of the OpenSSF projects and the direction they're going? So wanted to highlight this. We've talked throughout 2022 and 2023, there's been talk about OpenSSF as well as OWASP for that matter, about what direction should it be going? What are the types of projects they should be adopting? So wanted just to a call to action, because I know surveys are always really hard to get responses for.
Mm-hmm. And for folks listening, the reason these guys are doing surveys like this is it really is, there's a group of, usually volunteers that are like going, okay, we've got an idea, we want to work on something, but they're looking to see is this something which really matters to the community. So whereas someone, and I'm not sort of casting bad juju on OWASP, but I am picking on them. where OWASP could go and say, hey, let's do a top 10 vulnerability list for, Raspberry Pis. Instead, what's happening here is the folks are reaching out to the community and saying, hey, is this important to you? Or which aspects of this are important? Or which do you feel you would like to see more either research or papers or help with? So it takes a few minutes to fill out those surveys like this, and it helps a lot of people.
It does. It's this idea of what are your pain points? Let us know so we can hopefully help them. One other thing we've been talking... Speaking of NCC Group, I did grab another report. We talked about this a while ago about AWS Nitro, and I think this actually got you pretty interested, John. So that's the other reason I wanted to throw this in here. And they talk about, basically the report says these security claims stand up, which is okay, good. So it's not necessarily a meaty report. I grabbed this more as a wish that I wish the assessment methodology was more robust, or in this report or other public reports of this type, because I think this assessment methodology is where other people could learn from. That's a real educational aspect. So I don't know if such things exist, but if they do, listeners, please let me know, and we'll cover them. We would love to highlight that. But John, AWS Nitro, how did this rev your engine?
I really dig Nitro. I think we mentioned before, I just had in my notes from last year's reInvent, CMP 301 is a deep dive on AWS Nitro System. It's a great talk. I've been going the last few weeks, I've been going back listening to Peter, it's not Murphy, Peter, gotta get it quickly. Peter DeSantis's Monday Night Live talks from reInvent years, and he tends to go really deep into some of these things. So yes, my eyes lit up when I saw this. You found this paper, Mike. But at the same time, I was looking for more depth on it. I get that they're trying to have a third party review this so that their large customers have faith in it. But I'd love to see those guys get one of these Nitro cards and actually spend some solid time with it, because that's when you'll really get a sense of what that's like. So I'm guessing Amazon goes to all sorts of trouble that we're not going to see these things floating out on eBay anytime soon. I'm guessing those are qualitatively either shredded or Apple-wise sort of desalted and used in an environmental way. But it'd be great to grab our hands on one of these and just really sort of hack on it for a few months, see what comes out of it.
If they show, maybe there'll be a DEF CON Nitro village in a year or two. If anyone's going to get their hands on one of these, it'll be a DEF CON village. Part of this report, as I mentioned, also the assessment methodology, part of that is, what are the threat models, the threat scenarios they put together. And for me, I did raise my hand for those of you who were paying attention in the last segment when John was talking about who likes threat modeling. I did raise my hand. None of the developers did. No surprise. Sorry, spoilers, but hopefully you already listened to that segment. However, I only like doing threat modeling with a Google Doc, a document, and maybe something to draw on, a whiteboard, a Visio, if Visio still exists, or whatever the modern version is. I'm not a big fan of tools, because tools seem to me more of an AppSec. It would be great if all the developers filled this out and all the developers look at that and say, how does that help me? So here's a tool, Deciduous, from Kelly Shortridge, who we just talked about, and her kitty Link also appeared on the episode, purring into the microphone. But this one at least looks like a tool that turns bullet points into a diagram. And I like to live in Markdown. So this one looks a little bit more approachable for me, for those of you out there who want some tools. Or, John, you say commonly that you're a very visual learner. Yes. You like pictures. So hopefully this is something that might work for you.
Yeah, this is someone could really have fun with eye tracking of this, because when I saw this, you had this link, my eyes just immediately went to the graph on the left, and probably after 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, there's Markdown. My eyes went to the right where the diagram is, and after about 5 minutes, I'm like, oh, there's Markdown at the left. Didn't even see it. But I think tools like this are really helpful, right? Because part of, you mentioned Visio, which is close to my heart, and I used to know it like the back of my hand. But the reason that we have some of the problems we have with these tools is the learning curve, like Visio, man. It takes a while to get to learn really well. And it's out there still with OmniGraffle and one or two other tools. People are doing more web-based stuff for that. Designing, or diagramming. But it takes a while to actually get to learn the tool. But what you're really trying to do is and this is why the whiteboard is amazing, right? Like grab a pen, grab a whiteboard, and just start doing move the hand back and forth. Don't worry about it and talking to people. You don't have to worry about what the tool is. And then at the end of the time, you just take a snapshot with your phone or whatever have you, and you let someone else go and turn it into a diagram. Or fumble and figure out the tool and try to turn it into a diagram. And that's I think what's interesting about Deciduous is that it allows you to both visually see what's going on, but also be able to just throw something into markdown and like have it there. And like the tool is not the goal, right? It's sort of like threat modeling for most people is not the goal. It's you're actually trying to figure out what is the actual threat and how do you get to it. So neat.
Well, absolutely. And it just gives me the chance to say, take a leaf from Kelly's book, read about security chaos engineering, and play with some attack trees on Deciduous. We've had a bunch of questions for listeners about more information, things to focus on. Any final questions you want to throw their way, John, as we wrap up our news for the week?
I'm really liking that theme we had from the last half hour of about how do you communicate? How do you empathize with someone else? How do you, and that's, I think, what application security at the end of the day is. We're trying to make the applications more secure, but it's a security person doing that usually who doesn't have hardcore developer background. There's some of those folks out there. I might consider myself in that group, but usually it's how do you, it's one person trying to figure out how do you get the other person interested to help you make that better. So always think about how do you, it is frequently in my mind, in the back of my head, like how do I actually get this? How do I communicate this to a different group of people? So I think that's useful for people to think about while they're listening to us or others.
Thank you for helping me communicate all these news articles for this segment and about all the top 10 lists as well. So thank you very much, John. Thank you everyone else for joining us. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes, and speaking of dark wave, check out Careful by Boy Harsher. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.